the guy.
He will do some interviews in the next 2 weeks. That's what I can confirm for you. Go ahead, Jackie.
Thanks, Jen. We've been told for a long time that some cyber attacks would likely precede an invasion. So if it turns out that Russia is behind what happened today, or is, I guess how I should phrase it is there work being done quickly to figure out if Russia is behind what happened today so that sanctions can be imposed before there is bloodshed? Or is the calculus still sort of centering on force on force or some passing over the
Sure. Well, we are constantly doing those assessments, and certainly as any cyber attack happens, that is certainly a process that happens behind the scenes and that our intelligence community and our national security community undertakes, as it would be in this case as well. I would note, though, as it relates to sanctions, one, there's a range of means that we could respond, both seen and unseen, so it's to a cyber attack or any other attack, and the president has the purview to do whatever he chooses in that regard. But our view remains that the crippling package of sanctions is an effective deterrent. So if you do that all in advance, what is to stop them from moving forward? Now, that may be a different policy issue, different of opinion, I should say, on policy issues with some in Congress, and that's okay, but that is our view from the administration.
And then this may or may not be related at all, but is there any information on what caused the power outage on the North Line? I mean, every TV network lost power at the same time during.
It was a very inconvenient time, I will just note for all of you and for us. I don't have any assessment of that, no. Or, yes, go ahead.
Does the White House view Ukraine giving up on NATO aspirations as a possible off-ramp? Understand that the president has said, the administration has said over and over that NATO members would not encourage or would not give up that ability for someone else to join. But they do have a long way to go, and now that there is all of this concern that if there was a member, if they did become members, it could potentially trigger Article 5. Is there any discussion among NATO allies about how significant it would be if Zelensky were to make that offer himself?
Well, we have not raised that from the United States. And again, I would reiterate what I said a little bit earlier, which is that our position is that we are not going to pressure Ukraine or any country to join or not join an alliance, that it is nations have the right to sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that's a choice for them to make.
Why is the administration encouraging Americans who are fleeing through Poland to bring proof of vaccination? As we understand it, Poland does not require a tax. So is there going to be a shift in messaging for Americans who are trying to get out through Poland?
I would check with the State Department on that. I'm happy to follow up for you on your behalf as well. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Jen. I want to circle back to the idea of what de-escalation would look like and how the administration would trust that it were actually real. Do you have a sense of how many troops you would need to actually see with your own eyes through satellite images or otherwise would need to withdraw in order for this administration to feel as though Putin were in fact de-escalating?
Well, I think, Kristen, that is a decision that we would make in partnership with our NATO allies, right, and European countries. And you look at everything from satellite imagery, something that many of you have access to validation and verification of what they're saying they would do. So I'm not going to be in a position, nor would I expect the Defense Department would be, to give you a troop number, but I think it would be very clear if that were a step they were taking.
I think there have been a lot of mixed messages publicly coming out today. Among them, the NATO Secretary General said that there is cause for cautious optimism when it comes to some of these talks that are happening behind the scenes. Does the administration, does the president share that cautious optimism? Because we heard from the president very firm language.
Well, the president also conveyed it would be positive if it was verified that they pull back their troops. And certainly the openness to diplomacy is something that everybody should support, and I think our NATO allies would support as well. At the same time, we've seen this playbook before, and especially given the history of President Putin and the Russians, their history of false flag operations, of misinformation, we need to verify.
That's my question. Does the administration share the NATO Secretary General's cautious optimism?
I think I don't think we need to put in more words than what the president just conveyed in a speech to the country.
GOP senators have unveiled a sanctions appropriations bill. Have you assessed whether or not this is something the administration wants to see some movement on? Is this something that you would potentially support, given that the bipartisan talks stalled?
Not yet, because it just came out. But again, our view remains that a bipartisan effort would be the best effort moving forward. And as I conveyed to Jackie a few minutes ago, our view continues to be that the crippling sanctions package we've designed is meant to be the deterrent. Go ahead, Ken.
Jen, the Senate's working on this stopgap funding bill that the deadline's Friday. What's the level of confidence that the President will be able to sign that extension by Friday? And separately, has the administration been talking to the two Republican senators who raised concerns, Senator Lee and Blackburn?
We are engaged with a range of Democrats and Republicans, and certainly we are hopeful that we will be able to sign this. I would note, though, that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that one of Senator Blackburn's primary concerns is about a relation to the funding of crack pipes. Is this correct? Which is not an issue. So this is an issue. What is happening here is its potential to hold up funding the government and important programs around an issue that is not an issue, because we've been very clear that we are not providing funding for crack pipes.
And then the Senate Banking Committee had planned to vote on your Fed nominees today.
Yeah.
There was a holdup there. Republicans have objected to Sarah Bloom Raskin's nomination. What does the administration think of this delay? And is the administration going to provide any additional details to Senator Toomey, some of the issues that he's raised?
Well, let me first say that this is in a very extreme step. That's totally irresponsible in our view. It's never been more important to have confirmed leadership at the Fed to help continue our recovery and fight inflation. And obviously they have a unique role to play, an important, a vital role to play as it relates to inflation. And I think Democrats and Republicans have agreed on that for decades. So Republicans are out there saying inflation's a problem, it's a huge issue, we agree, and then they're not even bothering to show up to even vote against these nominees to the Federal Reserve. What message is that sending to the American public? So and I would note just on Sarah Bloom Raskin, since you asked me about her as well, she's one of the most qualified individuals to ever be nominated to the Federal Reserve. She's made the strongest ethics commitments in the history of the Fed. Even as she's made extensive disclosures to the Banking Committee as a natural part of the process, Senator Toomey has continued to promote false allegations that have already been shot down by ethics experts, the Kansas City Fed, the founder of the Reserve Trust, and Sarah Bloom Raskin herself. So we're going to continue to work with Chairman Brown on a path forward and look forward to the Banking Committee eventually holding a vote to confirm these 5 nominees. Go ahead.
Is there any entertaining of other options if it stalls in committee? There appears to be some question about whether the Senate as a whole can advance these nominations. Is that something you're exploring, or is that something that you don't think you have the power to do?
You mean in terms of different legislative processes or different?
Speculation that the full Senate could sort of skip the committee vote if it stalls out and bring them forward.
Sure.
Do you believe that the Senate has that power, or does it have to go through committee?
Our focus right now is on working with Chairman Brown on moving these nominees through the committee.
Can I ask also on COVID funding? HHS briefed Congress this week requesting about $30 billion in funding. Can you give us a sense of, A, from that, B, what in particular do you need this funding for, and has the existing funding been allocated?
Sure. So HHS briefing today or this afternoon was a part of our regular conversations with Congress about various resource needs, including what is needed for COVID response. This is important because while we continue to have sufficient funds to respond to the current Omicron surge in the coming weeks, our goal has always been to ensure that we are well prepared to stay ahead of the virus. So we've been in these ongoing conversations about what those needs might look like, and this was a part of that effort. In terms of funds that have been allocated or spent, more than 90%, so available rescue plan funds, which is where the funding has come from to date, have been obligated or allocated. 90% of that has been for purchases of vaccines and therapeutics, vaccine distribution efforts that have gotten shots and arms testing, including for schools and at other high-need locations. Resources from the Rescue Plan and prior COVID response bills have enabled us to respond forcefully to Delta and Omicron surges. And what we're trying to do now is stay ahead and stay in contact with Congress about what those needs might look like.
Secretary Blinken said yesterday that the U.S. is not on pace right now to supply problem or the problem with what Secretary Blinken called last mile type stuff, giving shots in arms to borrow language to the college?
That is an undervalued part of it, I should say. So I thank you for raising that part of it. So right now we've shipped over around 40 million doses and are continuing to aggressively share around 10 million doses a week to the world, free of charge. We're the first country to buy doses for the sole purpose of sharing them with the world. We also bought, as you know, 1 billion doses. And Blinken, I think, made those comments in part because he wants to rally the world to do more. But a big part of our effort right now, and where we have seen challenge, is turning vaccines into vaccination, which means working closely with our partners on the ground and dealing with hyper-local issues countries may be facing to increase vaccination. And this is a big part of the focus of Ambassador Power and USAID's Global Vaccination Initiative. But part of it is that shots in arms component.
Have you started deferring their U.S. donations because the capacity is the problem more than the supply?
There have been moments, yes, where countries are not able to receive the doses that we're able to provide. Go ahead.
Thank you. Creating a gas tax holiday takes legislation.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what are other things that the president could do on his own to mitigate gas price hike because of Ukrainian conflict? What else can he do by himself? And in terms of releasing oil from the SPR, have a determination of how much cost rise that would offset? In other words, what good does it do? Yeah.
Sure, that's a good question, and those are assessments that our economic team is constantly, of course, making. We did see even the anticipation of the release back in December helped lower the price by about 10 cents. Assessments are constantly being made. In terms of without a decision being made, which I know you're not asking, there are steps the president has, obviously, he has also engaged clearly we need to ensure that the supply out in the global market is meeting the demand. And obviously, correct, yes, and that's been a part of our effort, even as we anticipate what impact there could be from an invasion. There's obviously a difference between natural gas shortages and the impact on home heating, which is largely a regional issue, but we have been still in Europe, but we've been still working with partners on that as well, but also on the supply of gas out in the market. Oil, I should say. But
the president said the invasion remains distinctly possible.
Yeah.
Senior administration officials said a couple days ago that as soon as this week, is that still the timeline, or has anything shifted based on mixed messages of the last couple days?
We don't have any assessments. As I think you heard the president say, there's a distinct possibility, but we don't have a new assessment of a decision.
And then I know there have been internal discussions about giving a speech like the one the president gave today for some time. Why today? And then the intent behind it. Obviously, it seemed to be looking to put up multiple audiences to deliver specific messages to them. So why today, and why that range of messages?
You know, Phil, I mean, you all have been covering this very closely, the potential of an invasion, our diplomatic engagements, and there's no question the American people have been consuming what you have been reporting. But I think we felt, and the president felt, it was important to be very clear and direct with the American people about what the impact could be on them, what the consequences would be, what our values are, and why it is important to stand by territorial integrity and sovereignty of a country, but also stand among our allies and partners around the world. So it was very important to him to lay out very clearly what steps we've taken, the actions we're prepared to take, what's at stake for the United States and the world, and how this will impact us here at home. In terms of why today, it wasn't based on, obviously, as you saw, a desire to put out new policy or based on something new internally. It was just the president's interest in feeling it was time to speak directly to the American people about all of those issues.
And just last one on the first point that you made there. Is there concern either by the president or the White House that perhaps the understanding or support for kind of traditional Western alliances that have been a pillar of the last 8 years is waning or doesn't exist to the degree that it used to?
I think Phil did. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't have any data assessment of that, but we also fully aware of the fact that right now the American people are still grappling with a pandemic. They're grappling with rising costs, two big issues the president speaks to quite frequently. And it was important to him to be able to lay out clearly for them what this potential conflict, potential invasion in a place that may feel far away, and how that could impact them, and his engagement. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. President Biden today said there's 150,000 Russian troops encircling Ukraine. That appeared to be a higher number than previously reported. I think 130,000 is how most recently we've seen it characterized. So is the president confirming an actual escalation of Russian troops, or why did he present a new number there?
Well, I think over the last dozen days or so, we've seen a dramatic acceleration and buildup of troops. And so the president said in his remarks very carefully, it's encircling Ukraine on the border and also in Belarus. And so I think he felt it was important to give an assessment of where things stand.
Secondly, regarding a gas tax holiday, you said, quote, all options remain on the table. There is right now a bill from Senate Democrats that would institute a suspension of the gas tax for the rest of the year. Does the White House support that specific bill?
We haven't made any decision about additional steps at this point in time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Two questions. As you mentioned earlier, Vice President Harris is headed to the Munich Security Conference this week. Does the president plan to also send Secretary Blinken? And if so, would a last-minute addition suggest a different or perhaps reduced or more limited role for Vice President Harris at that conference?
I don't think there's any plans to limit or reduce the vice president's role at the Munich Security Conference or at the global stage. On a global stage, she's going to give a speech while she's there, and she is a vital and important representative for the United States and our values and our intentions at this point in the world. But in terms of plans for Secretary Blinken to attend or not, I can check with the State Department and see. There are plenty of leaders to meet with, so more bandwidth.
On a different note, the president continues to talk about his Build Back Better plan. He did so today, did a couple of events last week. What is the White House expectation at this point about the future of that plan? Is there any evidence of any sort of forward movement, forward progress, even on a pared back version of that? There doesn't seem to be a lot of optimism or action right now on Capitol Hill, but can you talk about what the White House expectation is for that and why the president continues to bring this up?
Well, the president continues to bring it up because as we talk about the impact of inflation, which most people experience in their daily lives as rising costs, one of the ways that we can address that is by passing legislation that will help lower costs for Americans, whether it's child care or health care or the cost of prescription drugs. And we can do that and fully pay for it by making the tax system more fair. So what is encouraging to the president is that there is broad support for lowering costs for the American people in all of those categories and for making the tax system more fair. And we are continuing to work in lockstep and in partnership with a range of senators, and they're having their own discussions about moving these efforts forward. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jen. One question on Asian Americans and one question on Ukraine. On Asian Americans, actually the Team USA gold medal winner, Chloe Kim, revealed as an Asian American, according to AP, quote, she was tormented online daily. She said she was consumed by the fear that her parents could be killed whenever she heard the news about another brutal assault on an Asian person, unquote. Actually, under President Biden's watch in 2021, the anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 339%. It seems we don't see much action taken by the White House, and even in a press briefing, the very last time you mentioned about Asian Americans was last May. So will the president take some action or even just record a video like what he did last year to raise the awareness?
Well, let me say first that Chloe Kim, I'm obsessed with the Olympics, so I'm just going to give you a little biography here, but she's 21 years old, and she made those comments, which is incredibly courageous and brave that she spoke out about the fear she has for her family members. And she's not the only Asian American to do that, but she is somebody who is now a double gold medalist, amazing. And so I just want to take a moment to applaud her for her courage in doing that. I will say that the president has put in place a task force. He has hired a senior level staffer to be a representative and be someone who can speak to these threats and these concerns and these fears felt by the Asian American community, because there's a number of steps we need to take and continue to take to address. And we've seen this rise, unfortunately, because of hate-filled rhetoric and language around the origins of the pandemic. And that is something that Asian Americans across the country have been feeling. So I can just reiterate for you that the President is absolutely committed to continuing to speak out, to crack down, to take steps. And again, would thank Chloe Kim for her courage. Go ahead on that. Lim, I just have to keep going because we got to...
On Ukraine, Jen, President Biden said that we should give diplomacy every chance to succeed. Secretary Blinken, after his call with Foreign Minister Lavrov, said that a window remains open to resolve this peacefully. On the timeline, how long does the President think that window should stay open? If there's no invasion, but also no pullback of Russian troops?
Well, what's the alternative if we don't leave the window to diplomacy open? Right? I mean, you know, our objective, obviously, as you heard the President say today, there is no threat the United States is posing to Russia, to the Russian people. There's no threat that Ukraine is posing to Russia. What we're working to do here is leave a forum for de-escalation and prevent a war. And so to us, the door to diplomacy should always be open, and we should always look for opportunities to de-escalate.
Concerned this turns into like a frozen conflict, basically, where troops just stay on the border and there's no invasion but also no pullback?
Well, again, there's going to have to be a continued dialogue and discussion, but Russia not invading Ukraine and not risking and impacting the lives of many, many people in that country, including potentially American citizens, would certainly be a step we would welcome.
What Americans should prepare for, you mentioned the threat of cyber attack. The President mentioned that as well. And we know Homeland Security has previously mentioned they've seen an uptick in scanning on U.S. critical infrastructure and so on. Should Americans be prepared for a potential Russian cyber attack on critical U.S. infrastructure or other networks?
Well, I would say even before we've been discussing the buildup of troops at the border, and even before we've been discussing the bellicose rhetoric, we have seen an uptick in cyber activity by malicious actors around the world, either those living in countries or the countries themselves. And so that is something, I don't have any new threat or new warning to pose today, but that is something we have certainly been amping and increasing our focus on as a threat that's emerging, but has been the case for the last several years.
Can you take the question on Africa?
Yeah, 1 second, go ahead, and then I'll go to you.
Jen, just this hour, lawmakers put out a bipartisan statement warning President Putin. I know you've said from the podium that the White House doesn't need Congress to pass the sanctions package to implement your own sanctions package, but wouldn't it have sent a stronger message if there had been an agreement reached? What message do you think it sends to Putin that all we got out of Congress was a statement?
I think President Putin knows very clearly, because he's heard it directly from President Biden's mouth, that if he invades Ukraine, that there will be crippling sanctions, and we don't need Congress to act in order to do that.
When will the president make a decision on any new energy policies to impact prices at the pump? Because even without an invasion, prices have risen beyond where they were before the emergency reserve release back in November.
You're right, and the president is very focused on making sure we're doing everything we can to lower the cost for Americans in any way it hits them, whether it's prices at the pump or when you go buy a pound of meat or wherever it may be. So we're continuing to assess, and he's continuing to look at options. I don't have a prediction of any decision, though. Go ahead. I'll go to you after, Simon. Go ahead.
Switching topics entirely, the
Sure.
President is headed later this week to Ohio. He said that he'd like to be out in communities with people frequently. How often would he like to be out there per week? What do you guys ramp
Every
up
day?
to? Well, but when he says that,
Yeah.
what is your anticipation? Is he looking to travel 2-3 days a week, and when would we expect that to ramp up?
You know, I think you can expect that to increase around the State of the Union and after, I think we are constrained by a couple of things, including the CR funding, but also the fact that there is a whole lot going on in the world. Even though he can be president anywhere, he also has a responsibility to sometimes be in the White House, or oftentimes be in the White House. But he's looking forward to getting out there more in the coming weeks.
Does he have anywhere specific that he hasn't been yet, or places that he hasn't been that he feels frequently enough that he'd really like to get back to?
Good question. I would venture to guess that he has probably been nearly everywhere, given he ran for president a couple times and vice president. As president, I don't have any prediction of states or readout of states that he's looking forward to going to, but I'm sure he is looking forward to traveling around the country, blue states, red states, across the gamut. Go ahead. Okay, Simon, I'll go to you. Go ahead, Simon.
Okay, thank you. It's been 3 months, so if you can allow me to ask 2 questions. The President spoke with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia on January 10th. It's been almost a month now, more than a month since that call took place. And the WHO yesterday released a statement saying that they still don't have access to the Tigray region for humanitarian access because the government is not allowing them to have fuel. So is the President still interested in anything else apart from Ukraine?
Of course he is. The President has to be a global leader in the world, and he is responsible for not just what's happening around the world, but also what's happening domestically. Let me give you an update or a comment from here. We're hopeful that recent steps taken by the government of Ethiopia and other actors might open a path to resolving the conflict. Over the last month, the Prime Minister has taken steps to promote dialogue, release political prisoners, and enable expanded delivery of medical supplies in the Tigray region. We continue to have serious concerns about the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia, and we are focused on working with our parties, with all parties, to end the source of the suffering, the military conflict. Go ahead, Karen.
President Zelensky tomorrow is calling for a day of unity, a national holiday tomorrow in Ukraine. His message for the last couple of days, if not longer, has been "Don't panic" to Ukrainians. Does the administration have concerns that Zelensky and Ukrainian leaders have not adequately prepared the Ukrainian people for a Russian invasion?
Well, I'm not going to speak to that. What I can speak to is what we feel our role and responsibility is, which is to provide a range of information about what we see at the border, what we see Russia preparing, and our assessment of what impact that could be. Every leader makes their own decision.
Do you have an update on the humanitarian assistance that the U.S. is talking with European allies? Should that happen and the Ukrainian people need that?
Sure. I know Secretary Blinken made an announcement, I believe it was yesterday, about additional assistance. Let me just see if I have any more details on it in here, and if not, I will get that to you shortly after the briefing. Karen, let me just see. Let's see here. Let me get you, I can get you, let's see, so we just announced, a sovereign loan guarantee to Ukraine of up to $1 billion to bolster Ukraine's economy amidst pressure resulting from Russia's military buildup. This builds on the $3 billion in sovereign loan guarantees we issued to Ukraine between 2014 and 2016. We've also committed more security assistance to Ukraine in the last year than at any point in history, $650 million. We also announced we're launching a new partnership fund for a resilient Ukraine with our allies and partners to continue to expand on that. The last thing is the Export-Import Bank has made available $3 billion in support for projects in Ukraine, and the Development Finance Corporation has a current investment portfolio in Ukraine of approximately $800 million across more than a dozen projects. So we've obviously provided a range of assistance, which we will continue to build on. Go ahead.
Jen, will Vice President Harris be meeting with President Zelensky when she's in Munich?
I don't have anything on her planned meetings at this point in time. I expect we'll have more as we get a little bit closer, and I expect they'll do a preview call from her team as well.
And then an Olympics question.
Yeah.
Does the administration have any reaction to the IOC's decision to allow Russian figure skater, and I'll butcher her name, Kamila Valieva, to continue competing in the Olympics after her doping scandal?
Well, I would point you to the statement made by the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, who opposed the decision made in Beijing, saying it, quote, appears to be another chapter in the systemic and pervasive disregard for clean sport by Russia. But these were independent decisions made by the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency and Court of Arbitration for Sport. We don't have any additional comment from here. I would point you again to the U.S. Olympic Committee.
Go ahead. So the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows data that Russian oil being imported in the U.S. has been increasing over the past year. In May of 2021, it was the most on record. Now, the president said he wants to use all tools to keep gas prices down. Is he looking at temporary things to keep gas prices down should there be a Russian invasion? Or is there any consideration to reversing some of the policies and going back to increasing U.S. energy independence?
I don't have anything to detail for you, including in terms of what he is considering, but our overarching objective is to decrease the impact on American consumers and increase the impact on